Hi, I'm Nicole Ferraro, and this is The Divide, a podcast from Light Reading exploring the ongoing digital divide, why and where it still exists, and what needs to be done to get people everywhere connected to reliable, high-speed internet. My guest today is Gigi Sohn, Executive Director of the American Association for Public Broadband, or AAPB, which advocates for and represents community-owned broadband networks. In this episode, we discuss the state of the BEAD program, formerly known as the $42.5 billion Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, but not all of those numbers and words apply anymore, so we'll just call it BEAD. We get into what's going on with the BEAD program, including how far it's actually going to go at this point toward its original goal of closing the digital divide in the US, and why it may actually turn out to be a little like RDOF 2.0. We also discussed the growth and success of public broadband networks in communities across the country and the role public broadband can play in responding to BEAD's shortcomings and helping communities secure their broadband futures. All right. Gigi, welcome back to the podcast. What a pleasure to see you this morning. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back on again, Nicole.
So last time we had you on was in ye old December 2024. So it was after the presidential election, but before we saw how the Trump administration would alter the broadband funding landscape. But since then, the BEAD program has essentially been revised in a variety of ways to take a lowest cost to deploy approach. We have seen some of the funding shift to satellite as a result, some of the funding shift to unlicensed fixed wireless, some of the locations removed from the map as a result of some of the rules changes. So BEAD is a different animal than it was, maybe last year. We've also seen states have to go back to the drawing board entirely and rerun their bids. And where we sit now in mid-October, the majority of BEAD final proposals are with the NTIA, and we're in the midst of finding out to what extent they're going to ask states to re-revise those. And we're also unclear on the state of non-deployment funds, which are in the law that created BEAD, but may not be being used. We're not sure. It's unclear. And a lot of states are putting out press releases celebrating how much money they've saved this round of BEAD funding without really acknowledging the fact that they're supposed to use all that extra funding for non-deployment funds, technically, according to the law. And, without really, this is me editorializing a bit, reflecting on prior federal funding programs in which companies said, we can spend this little to do this, and then came back a year or two later and said, actually, we're going to leave this network unfinished unless you give us more money. I personally see that happening with BEAD, but that's just me. So anyway, enough about me and my thoughts. I want to turn this over to you and see, get your sense of where you think the BEAD program is, your reaction to some of those changes that have unfolded, and how you see BEAD panning out at this point.
Great. I have a lot to say. So in June in Houston, I gave a speech at an AAPB workshop, and it was called The New BEAD Rules, Course Correction or RDOF 2.0. And I tried to end on a positive note, saying that the changes at the time, which were largely saying, well, you can't just knock out satellite or unlicensed fixed wireless. You have to consider them. This has to be more technology neutral. But the statutory requirement for a priority broadband project, which says that it has to be easily scalable and capable, obviously, of meeting minimum speeds and latency requirements, and also capable of supporting future mobile wireless technologies and future technologies, period, like AI. And we're going to give the states, there was like even extra guidance after that saying, we're going to give the states a lot of leeway on priority broadband projects. So I ended my speech saying, I've had the pleasure of working with like between a third and half of the state broadband officers, and they're really terrific, and they're going to pull this one out. And the initial results we were seeing from states like Louisiana and Arkansas and other places look pretty good, right? West Virginia, 94% fiber. Louisiana, even though it was going to be close to like 98, 99%, was 85%, and I'm feeling good. And then we start to see, particularly some of the Western states, Colorado, 39%. Others, it was Nebraska, I think was 9%. I mean, and it came to find out, thanks partly to my friend and colleague, Chris Mitchell, that NTIA had this secret cost cap. And the secret cost cap basically said that we're going to use these mysterious, untransparent cost quest, cost per location numbers across the state. All right. So state average numbers, that will be the cap for anywhere in a state. So I just got back from a trip. My wife and I built a house in Western North Carolina, and my daughter goes to University of North Carolina at Wilmington, right? To the beach. So we're up in Appalachia. I had a speaking gig in Asheville. Again, mountains everywhere. The eastern part of the state is, beach and lowlands. And I mean, you can't get a more diverse state. Yet here's NTIA saying, if you are proposing a project, if somebody's proposing a project in the state that's over 65% of this state average that CostQuest put out, regardless of whether you're in the mountains or the hills or in the valleys, you've got to, the state has to renegotiate with that grant winner. And if you're at 85%, then you rebid it entirely. So in other words, what it's doing is it's basically layering RDOF on top of BEAD. So my optimism has completely crumbled. And by the way, my colleague Drew Garner has crunched the numbers for North Carolina, and it would go down from something like 60% fiber to like 40% fiber. It would have its terrible negative impact on the state of North Carolina. And you hit it right. You hit it right on the nose, Nicole. What's going to happen, and what has already happened, is there's been underbidding, right? And they'll start to build in Appalachia, and they'll be like, "This is too damn expensive. I'm going to default." So in June, it was course correction. In October, it is RDOF 2.0, and I'm just beside myself. And I'd like to say, as a nice Democrat, that I blame it all on the Trump administration, but I don't, because we never should have been in this position in the first place. I don't really want to get into the details. I've said this publicly at Mountain Connect and other places. And, this is crying over spilled milk, but it's interesting. In Asheville, I was interviewing my old friend and colleague, Jennifer Epperson, who used to be the chief counsel at the House Energy and Commerce Committee and is now a deputy general counsel for Josh Stein, Governor Josh Stein in North Carolina. And she literally started to cry on stage. And I have as well. I mean, I was angry in Asheville, but I've actually shed a tear because I worked on that bill. I worked on the infrastructure bill, on the broadband parts. And what is happening now is not what was intended. But the Biden administration did not get the job done. And that's why we are where we are right now. And I wish I could be optimistic, but I'm just not. And it's just sad.
I totally hear all of that. I think we could have an entirely separate conversation on where some of the hubris of the Biden administration has led us today. But here we are, right? So you've laid out the situation as it is. It's extremely disappointing. I've said this before. I found the BEAD program to be a pretty aspirational program in terms of how it intended to lift up various aspects of society in the process of connecting people to essential infrastructure. But whatever, don't worry about it. that hope is over. And BEAD, technically is officially bad now, as the somebody at the NTIA used to say BEAD without equity is bad, and equity is illegal now, I think. So anyway, so okay, we've established BEAD is obviously not going to get the job done, and it's probably going to leave a bunch of infrastructure in the ground or falling from the skies or whatever it is that doesn't actually connect people to the internet, and companies are going to be coming back to the federal government for more money for years to come. Hooray. So in the meantime, from your vantage point over there at the American Association for Public Broadband, I understand that you see a role, and you have for a while, because you have been beating the drum for a while that under the Biden administration, BEAD wasn't moving fast enough and probably wasn't going to get the job done. And so municipalities should start to step up and fill in the gaps. So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you see public broadband stepping up to finish the job or go back and fix the job that BEAD was supposed to accomplish?
Yeah, I gave a speech in Minnesota in a place named New Prague, not New Prague, New Prague. It is as Czechoslovakian as you can get, but it's New Prague. And I talked about this because Minnesota has been screwed both by RDOF and is going to get screwed by BEAD. So they are, I would say among the many states, they are really have been the worst off from the federal government trying to spend deployment money and then just basically not getting the job done. So I encourage them to basically take matters in their own hands and try to convince them. And this is going to be where I'm going to be beating the drum in the next year, is that the biggest challenge that I see for communities or counties, a lot of counties are actually looking at doing broadband now, because at a county level, it just makes a whole lot of sense. Some of these like really little communities, it's very, very pricey. But when you kind of spread out to the county level or do what they do in Vermont, so the communications union districts, or in Washington state, the public utility districts, it just makes sense to kind of do a larger scale project. And what I'm trying to convince them is that, look, yeah, it's expensive when you first look at it, but it's an investment that pays dividends. Okay. And not only soft dividends like more people moving in and a more robust housing market and happier businesses and more businesses moving in, but actually can create revenue streams for you, right? You could lease out lines to private providers. You could have service contracts with public safety and alarm companies and other service organizations that need those lines. So there are places around the country. Huntsville, Alabama is a perfect example, where they're making money. So it's not just cost savings, and there's obviously a lot of that. And again, Chattanooga being the ultimate example of a complete and total transformation of a city from a coal city that nobody wanted to live in to like one of the hottest cities in America, where everybody wants to live because there's tons of jobs, there's super fast internet, there's great homes. So that's my pitch, going to be my pitch for the next year, is like, don't just look at the cost and flip out. Okay, imagine, and you don't really have to imagine because there are examples, and we are basically starting to make a list that we're putting on our website, which we're going to redo because I don't like the website right now, of examples of communities, counties, others that are reaping benefits from their investments.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, in my state as well, the center of the universe, New York, we have our own municipal program up north, really. What's your take on how that's unfolding? I'm just curious.
Well, you have a fantastic head of your state broadband office, a guy named Josh Breitbart,
Yeah.
who is a fellow Open Society Foundation Leadership and Government Fellow, and I say that very proudly. And he is convinced Governor Hochul that municipal broadband is really important, particularly in the very rural areas, which she is from, by the way,
Yeah.
right? I think she's from up by
Yeah,
Buffalo.
she's Buffalo. Yeah.
So it didn't take much to convince her that we needed to seed, or the state needed to seed those kind of projects. I was working with a senator's office here. I won't mention who it is, a longtime old friend, trying to do something similar at the federal level. It would never pass, of course, but even having a bill would be terrific, where you
Yeah.
give, I think, up to like $500,000 of seed money to do feasibility studies and get done what needed to be done. But I think it's exploding and extremely popular, and I'd love to see more states copy that. I
Yeah.
mean, New York has done a lot of things I'd like to see states copy, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Thank you. I just love to talk about New York because it's so important, matters to everyone.
Well,
Uh,
that's my home state,
oh,
as you can
that's right.
probably hear from my voice,
That's
which
right.
hasn't.
You're a Long Islander.
I'm
That's
a
right.
Long Islander.
Yeah.
I haven't lived there since the '90s, but it doesn't make a difference. I talk to my
Yeah.
mother every day, and that's all I need to do
That's
in order
right.
to still sound like I'm a
That's
native.
right. That's right. Yeah, I just spent my weekends on Long Island, so yeah, and I come from Queens, so the accent will never leave me. No
Are you
matter.
a Met fan?
Uh, I'm a WNBA Liberty fan, so
Well, I'm a WNBA
I
fan
don't care
too.
about any. I as far as the Mets and the Yankees, I've always I'll go either way. I really don't care. That's sort of
Well,
my
good, because you don't want to get me started on the Mets or the Jets. So
no, and it
let's
wouldn't
move
help.
on.
I I know nothing. If you want to talk about the Liberty coach Sandy Brondello getting fired,
I know. I couldn't believe that. That was
I
so
am
weird.
very upset about that. And you're wearing seafoam green today. Our audience won't be able to see that.
But Nicole, can I talk about? I didn't talk about the non-deployment
I know.
funds.
I did want to go back to that, so
Okay.
I'm glad we've let's do it. Please talk
Okay.
about the non-deployment funds and what do you think is going to happen here, and what should happen here.
Well, this is one place where I'm trying to maintain hope. But quite honestly, Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, and Ariel Roth, the head of NTIA, are not making these states save. I think they've saved what, almost $17 billion already. Right, when all is said and
Sure.
done, it's going to be half the pot of money that was
Right.
right. It was 42 and a
It
half
was
billion
42
dollars.
and a half billion.
Gonna be,
Yeah.
but I don't think they made the states save all this money so they could give it back to them for non-deployment
No, I
reasons.
don't think so either. No.
And the only thing that's going to turn this around, and this is something that I'm working on in not only my AAPB capacity, but also my capacity as a senior fellow and public advocate with the Benton Institute for Broadband Society, is to try to get state legislators, governors, particularly Republicans, right, to weigh in and say, that's our money. By statute, that's our money. Now, Shelley Moore Capito, Senator Capito, has said something. Governor Landry from Louisiana said something. There've been a handful, literally a handful of Republican legislators, governors who've said, we need more, and we need a lot more. That is your money. And we're talking about Louisiana. I think it's like $400 million. I mean, we're talking about serious dough. North Carolina, $1 billion. I mean, we're not, and of course, unfortunately, or unfortunately, no matter how you look at it, in this instance, unfortunately, North Carolina has a Democratic senator, and nobody in this administration is listening to Democrats. So it's really going to take Republicans to step up and say, "Excuse me, $400 million, $500 million, $1 billion. That's our money by statute. We need that money if you want to make those networks work." We need that money. That's what that money is for. That money is for making sure that people get on those networks, that they get, that there's a workforce, that they can get pole attachments, that they get permits. I mean, it's for all the things, all the non-deployment. I would argue those things are deployment, but all the non-deployment things, I'm putting that in air quotes, that make the networks work. And without that, they're just wires in the ground or birds in the air.
Correct. And this is on top of the $2.5 billion of Digital Equity Act funding getting canceled, which would be going towards similar initiatives to help people get connected to the internet. I agree with you that Republican governors and senators should be stepping up. But what about the ISPs that need this funding to be spent so that people can actually subscribe to their services? Where are their voices? And, speaking to any statements they make, which is pretty minimal, they have almost nothing to say at this point. And as far as the Republicans speaking out, great, but it's all couched in all of this other language that's like, we are so grateful to everything you are doing. Everything is good, except can we have this money a little bit, maybe? And, I just don't know how effective that's ultimately going to be. So, yeah.
Well, let me talk about the ISPs for a minute,
Yeah,
because
please.
this may shock some of your listeners, but I have a really good relationship with them. Always have had, believe it or not.
Yes. Yes.
And I've been bitterly disappointed, with the exception of U.S. Telecom. They've been the most out there, but even so, still treading the line,
Mhm.
because they want to be able to go into the building and make their case, which is not being listened to, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
So I've been disappointed in industry. I think some of them have just decided the hell with it. This is just not for us. I don't think anybody had on their bingo card that Comcast would be the biggest winner of BEAD so far. And what's interesting is in a lot of places to sort of satisfy this RDOF cap, which is what
Yeah.
I'm going to call it from
Yeah.
now on,
Yeah. Yeah.
they've switched from offering fiber to offering cable, a
Yeah.
hybrid fiber, hybrid fiber coax. So we're
That's
like
right.
going back to the past. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a very, very
Well,
sad
that's how
story.
you low cost to deploy, right? That's how you
Yeah.
lower the cost is give people.
So yeah, so it's interesting. Comcast Trade Association, NTCA, and
Mhm.
CTA, excuse me,
NC, yeah. Very
NCTA.
annoying
Let's
having
not
an
let's
NC
not
and an
confuse
NT.
Shirley's group with I
Right.
guess now Corey Gardner's group.
Yeah, outgoing
Uh,
Shirley.
they were the ones who were like, "Yay, these are great changes," because
Yeah.
again, you've seen the results where Comcast is cleaning up. Charter's doing pretty well, not as well.
Yeah.
I don't think this is what Congress and I don't think Congress intended this to be the HFC, the hybrid fiber coax fund. Trust me. They didn't say fiber, but they clearly said in the Priority Broadband Project
Yeah.
that it has to be robust. And that's the other interesting thing about the caps that I didn't mention before. Priority Broadband Project has no relevance
None.
with regard to the caps, which I also think is illegal, by the way.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, again, this is in the law. You know, when the first guidance came out, right? The first changes came out in June. They're like, we're going to stick with the law. We're going to, plain language of law. All this, Biden
Yeah.
DEI stuff's going out the window. But they're not even doing that, right?
Right.
They're skirting the non-deployment. They're skirting the Priority Broadband Project. Obviously, the Digital Equity Act, that is the law.
Yeah.
And the president, via, it's not tweet, it's whatever they do on social, Truth Social, said, sorry, don't like this law, ain't going to spend the money. It's like,
Yeah.
excuse me?
Right.
So that's three things right
Mm.
off the bat where if somebody wanted to sue, and we know there is now a brand new lawsuit with regard to the Digital Equity Act, but I'd
Yes.
be curious whether any of the ISPs will sue either, or the states will sue. I'd be shocked if at least blue states didn't sue on the non-deployment money if that money is not given back to the states, which again, I don't expect it to. I'd be
Yeah.
shocked if they didn't. But as far as like these BEAD changes and the results, will any of the ISPs sue? I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't think so either because they're interested in, making sure their mergers and various deals go through, and this would not be in their best interest to ruffle any feathers. And that is simply the situation we're in a variety of ways. And I know you've been outspoken about, big law firms and others that are not doing their jobs right now. Okay, before I drag us deep into a hole of despair. Okay, actually, let's get a little bit more despairing before we pick it back up. Okay, you see a huge role for public broadband in this moment, and we should say, as given you're someone who does have a good relationship with ISPs, a lot of these public networks are public-private partnerships. We see ISPs getting involved in open access networks and stuff. So there are roles for everyone here in delivering connectivity to people affordably and accessibly. So, but what is still standing in the way of public broadband initiatives? Are we still seeing a lot of laws preventing municipalities from moving forward? And you and I have spoken previously about dark money fueled attacks on these type of networks. What role is that still playing in both sort of scaring states and communities away from even trying them, or making, and what role are those playing in diminishing the effectiveness of potential public broadband networks?
I mean, you still have 16 states that have some sort of limitation, and it runs a gamut from like Nebraska is like, no way in hell will there ever be, public broadband in the state, to Pennsylvania saying, yeah, you can have public broadband, just can't make any money from it. That's a that's an incentive. Just to other other obstacles. Municipalities having to do sort of more due diligence, and and basically just making it harder for them to to accomplish this. So they still have 16 states. Again, it runs the gamut from, yeah, we could probably, if we really really want to, like Utah still
Utah. Yeah,
has
I
a
always think of
right.
Utopia Fiber.
But
They,
obviously there's public broadband everywhere because Utopia is as open access networks. So those kind of things can be gotten around. And then of course again there are those that are just like no and hell no. So obviously that's still an obstacle that I'd like to see go away. I'm always open to to working in any state. So even Michigan has some kind of minor obstacles, but they're one of there's two very promising projects there right now. One is Vivacity, is which is a type of construction company. Build operate company is working with 4 counties, including Genesee County, where Flint is, and 3 other counties to build a middle mile network, and eventually fiber to the home in those counties. That's really exciting. And then my newest board member, Josh Edmonds, just
yeah,
is
Digital C
launching
CEO.
Digital C in Detroit with the help of the Merit Network, which is the research and education network there, with a fantastic person named Charlotte Buersdorf, who is just like a force of nature. So I'm really, really optimistic. But Michigan still has some restrictions, but there's ways of getting around them. So that obviously is still one obstacle. Yes, there are still some companies that are funding dark money groups to, throw sand in the gears. The latest example was actually in Minnesota, in a small town named Wilmer. Charter, pretty much, they were almost doing it in their own name, like they weren't even hiding it. Was trying to block an open access network there. The city council, I think it was last month or the month before, said, Charter's like, we'll build it instead. And city council's like, nope. And I believe it's this month the Wilmer City Council is going to vote to move forward on an open access network.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
they're still trying. I'm finding less and less.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't want to maybe they don't want to fight with AAPB, although you may have seen Breitbart went after me again. So I guess I'm still relevant.
That's a badge
Yay.
of honor, truly. Yeah.
But I do think actually, Nicole,
Yeah.
the biggest challenge in front of us is, number one, is the cost,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also having the resources. That's where we really want to be the resources for communities and counties in particular. Somebody suggested to me, and I think this is a brilliant idea, that I start going to like National Association of Counties regional conferences and talking to people there.
Oh
It's
yeah.
I think people don't know where to start. They don't know who to talk to. And then they see the initial price tag and they're like, oh my God, I don't want to lose my AAA bond rating, or I don't have a AAA bond rating, and I don't want to fund this with taxpayer dollars, which is absolutely not necessary. There's a lot of different ways to fund these networks. So I think that's the challenge that I'm going to want to work the hardest on. Obviously, if the dark money groups keep popping their heads up, or there are very biased journalists who remain nameless, who want to, keep saying every time a municipal network sells its cable system, saying they're failing, even though their fiber networks are exploding. Like one journalist just talked about, where was the network again? I don't even remember.
I forget I know the journalist, but I forget
Oh, Idaho Falls. Idaho
Oh,
Falls.
right. Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
Right. So, oh, it's a failure. They sold their cable. Excuse me. Everybody's selling their cable systems.
Yeah.
Right. Cox is selling
Right.
their cable systems.
Right.
Are they a failure?
Right.
So, like, the cost of TV programming, regular TV programming, is too expensive for everyone. So, why not just deliver super fast internet and people can stream? Imagine that. That's what's happening in this country. So, again, if we can get them over the hump, uh, of believing that they can afford to do this and that it will pay dividends in the future and help them, because there are companies and more companies, frankly, that are dying to help municipalities. And a lot of them have actually separate divisions that are dedicated entirely to open access and municipal work. So I think, during the height of BEAD and the Biden administration, things kind of slowed down for us because I think people thought, oh, BEAD was going to solve it all. I never thought that, but you can imagine when there's $42.5 billion floating out in the ether, you're thinking, okay, well, what do I need to build my own for? I'm going to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And now that's clearly not going to be the
Now it's like
case.
$30. So, there's.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. I think you got us like back to the, hopeful, optimistic end of the conversation without me leading you there. But is there anything else you wanted to say about your work, your plans for AAPB this year, or anything else you want to alert the world to that you're working on over there?
Well, we had a very successful conference in Washington, D.C. last May, and it was not only a conference, but it was also, we did a Hill Day where about 30 of us went around to a bunch of Hill offices. Our specific ask was, please pressure, the administration to not screw around with BEAD, let the states be in charge and to release the non-deployment money. Obviously, we didn't succeed in that. But we want to expand that. We're probably going to move it to September just because we don't want to conflict with the Fiber Broadband Association, which is once again moving their big conference, I think, back to May. We also are working on setting up a regional conference or two. We're looking at Chattanooga, actually, to have a regional conference there sometime in March. We want to maybe focus really hard on a bunch of regions and get a bunch of communities and a bunch of ISPs in those regions and really focus there as well. So, and then we're going to continue our webinar series with ILSR. So look for some. I believe the next one's going to be in November. So there will be more programming. But again, the big thing for me is trying to get resources in people's hands so they can move forward, and continuing, to travel around the country and preach the gospel of public broadband. And let me just say, Nicole, it gives me no joy to sit here and say, woohoo, the demise of BEAD is awesome for public broadband. Again, as somebody who worked on BEAD, who worked on the ACP, which of course has been no longer for a year, and its predecessor, the Emergency Broadband Benefit. It gives me no joy to say that this program is just not going to be what we'd hoped it was going to be. It makes me sad, but I'm certainly going to take advantage of the opportunity that it provides me.
I would say that, in this horrible situation we're in, I feel very glad that you're in this position because, it means there's still hope for everybody.
Well, I tell people, and I said this in Asheville last week. I said, if you want a short-term victory, this is the wrong area of law and policy to be in. It goes up and down, up and down. We're in a downturn right now. But I do see, I don't want to say I see the light. I see this opportunity in the downturn. And like I said, AAPB is going to try to take advantage of it as much as we possibly can.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for all the work you're doing, and for just chatting with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope you'll come back soon.
I love it. I love talking to you, Nicole, and keep your chin up.
I'm trying.
It was the mamas and the papas said, darkest hour is always before dawn.
That's true. That's true. All right. Thank you, Gigi.
My pleasure.
Thank you again, Gigi, for joining me. Thank you as well to Pierre Landriau for editing this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Light Reading Podcast for more episodes of The Divide, as well as interviews and insights from the Light Reading team. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.